So today, so excited today on the High Pressure Podcast. Today we also are going to have Marie Ratermann, but now it's Mary Williams. I have to tell you, she got married. I love the guy to death. And I love my daughter just a little bit more, but I love that guy to death. So now it's Marie Ratermann Williams or Marie William Ratermann, but it's one of those. Okay, so we're going to have her today on the podcast with her Tipping Point podcast. And then we have Galen, which is going to be so exciting to hear all kinds of things today. The things you never ever thought of, they're going to make your business so phenomenal and so fantastic and a lot more fun to work in. So welcome to the show today, Galen.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So you know what? I know a couple things about you. I know you're big on words. You love words. You know, you're a craftsman of words. I like that myself too. I get all into super words, what the meaning of the word is, how that word got about. But one of the things I know that you have is just a real thing about culture. So I had a couple questions for you on that. Culture is on the top of everybody's mind, it seems like today. Every day you hear about culture, every magazine's talking about culture, as if some new magic thing happened about culture. But culture, we've always also know there's always a culture in a business. A lot of times people talk about the bad culture in a business. But what I want to ask you is your definition of what is culture in the business?
Yeah, this is so great. I love it. Let's get into some juicy stuff off the bat. I think one of the reasons that culture is so difficult for organizations to get right is because if you sit down and take 10 executives or anything, I don't care how long people have been in business, and you just like, hey, what's culture? Define culture. What is culture in an organization? Everybody will say wildly different things. And I think one of the reasons it's so hard for organizations to get culture right is because there's not a lot of common language. There's not a lot of common understanding of when we say culture inside an organization, what do we mean? And so my definition, when I talk about culture, when I do this work with teams, it is basically culture is the way that people show up, treat other people on the team, and approach their work. So culture is the rules of engagement that define what it means to be part of a team. And every organization has a culture, whether it's good, bad, and different, whether it's clearly articulated, whether it is through osmosis and through observation that people learn culture. But however people show up and treat other people in the team and approach their work together collectively is your culture. So if people would be afraid to give feedback to their leaders, that is part of your culture, right? If you have silos between departments or people badmouth each other or gossip, right? That is part of your culture. You wouldn't put it on a poster and say, here we go. But and positive too, right? Not just negative things, but everything that is also positive is part of your culture.
What it makes me think about when you said that every company has a culture. It might not be a purposeful culture. It might not have been chosen to be that way. It just happened. Could have happened great. Could have happened not so great. Or is it a purposeful culture? And I think maybe what's going on today is people are saying, how do you analyze and look at your culture, make it purposeful as the way in which it will be the best driver for your company and you're taking care of your customers.
100%. Yeah. Ultimately, you have a culture, whether it's clearly defined or not. And again, kind of like thinking about this definition is what everybody wants is a very intentional, very exceptional culture.
I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but it's an interesting thing, Marie, as people are coming into the entry level as a younger age and then middle area, kind of like where you're at with managing and all in the organization moving up. That culture is very different, maybe what they're looking for as they look at a company. Because a lot of times you hear about a lot of industries, including ours, it's not real sexy and real attractive to a younger person. And part of that's because they might look at the culture and how that culture is. I'd kind of like to get your viewpoint. When you look at companies and talk to people in your age group, what are they looking for in a culture?
I think generally people want a culture that is intentional, right? They want to feel like they're part of a team. They want to feel like they're treated well by their coworkers. They want to feel like they're treated well by their managers, that they're valued right? Their contribution is valued.
Yeah.
I think when you speak to younger generations in the workforce, I think also that like they highly value work-life balance. They want companies to be successful. They want to work hard. They want to make impact. They want to contribute, but they also want to be like, I'm not going to completely sacrifice my life for this company to be successful. Both things are true. And I think that's a little bit of a shift in kind of perspective and needs. But yeah, I think people are looking for, is my manager going to treat me well? Is my company going to have my back? Are they going to treat me and value me? Are they going to pay me well? Are they going to compensate me well? Is it going to feel good to go to the office? Am I going to be surrounded by people who are pulling their weight, who are intentional, who are right, that are high performing? Like, I think those are the things generally that most people want.
Yeah. And Maria, if you thought about, you've got a big following in your podcast. If you thought about some of the folks in your podcast, what would be some of their thoughts when they look at companies in a constructive way, when they're looking at what attracts them or doesn't attract them, and it looks at culture of companies?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for an entire generation, but I think what's been frustrating when I have conversations with young professionals is that it seems that the older generation or the boomer generation has already decided for us what we want. And it's actually not what we want. And it's not how we work. They want to say we're lazy or whatever the case may be. where actually it seems like when you talk to the older generation, the culture that was in their working environments when they were my age, working their way up, was a lot of like tough love, where now it's like, hey, why can't we all just get along together and work well together and come up with the best solutions for the company that may be a little more creative or maybe doesn't require as much work? And in our minds, we're thinking, if we don't have to put the labor in here, that allows us space to then have those creative thoughts or put more energy into other fields that we might not even be looking at, right? Whether that's, I don't know, like SEO or search engine optimization or building out better websites or hosting fun events for their customers or hosting fun events internally for our employees. So I think what I've been hearing from the feedback of young professionals in my generation is we want the knowledge of the older generation. We just are tired of being misunderstood. So how can we all collaborate together where they're getting benefit from us and we're getting benefit from them? Talking to Galen previously, you had a really good point of how a different mindset shift for the older generation and younger generation working together.
Marie, you bring up a really great point we just talked about. And that's such a big thing we're always talking about in our company, because there's a difference, which is mentoring, right? So maybe that's really the big piece there. I'd really like to get that word from Galen, your thought on mentoring. When I say that word.
Yeah, I think it's critically important. And I think a lot of organizations right now, we're talking about succession planning or who's going to be next in line, who are the next generation of leaders, and they're starting to take over and come. It's like we have to prepare those people. And I think that the idea of mentoring also, and I know that this clicks in people's brains when you hear mentoring, you think of, okay, people that are older, that are experienced, that have more, they're going to mentor people that are younger. And the reality is that mentorship needs to go both ways, because there's a lot of things that younger generations, they see things differently, they solve things differently, they work more efficiently. We're generalizing, of course, but I think it's important when we think about mentorship as a leader in a company. I think on your executive team, I think you need to have representation of younger, different minds. And mentorship can also be like having somebody who is younger in their career, who is 25 or 30 or 35, also mentoring and working together in partnership with senior leaders, because there's so much to learn from each other. And if we adopt this very rigid old school mindset that we have something to teach because we're older, we have more experience, we've been here, we know everything, and what can these people that are younger in their career and more junior have to teach us? That mindset is so limiting, because the reality is that like change and the industry and like customers, everything is moving so quickly, and that there's so much for both people to learn. So when I think about mentorship, I think about it both ways. I think about like mentoring senior leaders with younger leaders, so that senior leaders are also keeping their skills tight, keeping up on what's going on, keeping up on trends, understanding what do younger generations want in the workplace. If the people trying to figure that out are all 55 years old, trying to figure out what do 23-year-olds want, why don't you bring them in the room and ask them? Like it's so important when we think about mentorship and we think about learning from each other and having that kind of growth mindset, creating an organization that values learning, that values growth, that values embracing change as progress. We have to also tap into those younger generations. If you want to know what your customers want, you ask them. And so many companies bang their head against the wall being like, what do these young kids want? It's bring them into the room and ask them, bring them into the conversation. They'll tell you, you don't have to figure it out. They know, right? And ask your employees, ask your people, what do you want? What do you value? What makes you feel valued here? Ask those questions and care about what they have to say. So mentorship is important because we want to bring up like more junior employees and prepare them and get them ready for leadership and focus on what skills they need to become better. But also mentorship needs to go both ways.
And one of the things mentorship is, it's really an investment. I mean, we'll buy a computer, we'll buy a piece of equipment, we'll buy an automated piece of machinery. It's an investment. And really mentoring is an investment because it takes more time. I mean, it's one thing to tell people, just go do this, versus having an explanation why, how, what we're trying to achieve, what the goal is, what's the long term. But boy, that investment could sure pay off over time. It is going to be a thing that pays over time. It doesn't necessarily pay that day or the next day. But it sounds like, Marie, that's the key piece, especially as you're looking to attract younger people that are wanting to learn and grow. That mentorship probably is a big piece.
Yeah. And I have a thought and a question around this. Galen, when you say that the younger generation, what did they say? Working to live, not living to work. We want that work-life balance, right? And everything that's coming to mind is we don't want to be in a work environment, in a culture where we're constantly fighting to prove ourselves. We want to have the space to get the best seat on the bus. And if that seat isn't right for us, we want to be able to have a mentor we can reach out to that can help us guide us along and figure out what's wrong, what we can improve on, and then where we're succeeding. If we're in an environment, like if you're working for a company, if you're a young professional working at a company where the leadership isn't thinking in that way and they're not allowing you to have a seat at that table, what advice do you have to young professionals of how to help foster a different culture where your voice is heard a little bit more?
Yeah, that's such a juicy question. And that comes up, the same sentiment comes up when it comes to culture, when it comes to feedback, when it comes to mentorship. And it's okay, if the senior leadership, if the people who hold the cards, if the people who hold the power aren't willing to ask for feedback, aren't willing to receive feedback, aren't willing to accept these things, how do you deal? Like, what is advice? It's so challenging. And I think anyone who is in a senior leadership position and thinking about that, this is the question I get all the time. My leader's not open to feedback. How do I get my leader open to feedback? How do I get them to focus and want to understand that culture is important? The power dynamic there is real. And the reality is that those leaders in those positions have to be the one who say, we're receptive to, we care about learning, we care about mentorship, we care about growth, we care about change, we care about like valuing people and wanting to be receptive and open. Because if you have this power dynamic, I have the ability to be like, that's not important, no, and shut down everything in that space. And that's really tough. And so to answer your question, to actually give advice, I think it's important to understand your audience. I think making a business case for these things versus so here's an example. If I'm dealing with somebody who I think I put in this sort of like boomer category and they're an older mindset, they don't see value in culture or whatever, I think that like I have to speak their language. So the things that they care about individually, personally, aren't work-life balance or the things that might be more important to me, but making a business case by speaking the language of the people that are your audience, right? So there is a business case for improved culture because it impacts retention, it impacts people's morale, people's performance, and like hard numbers inside the organization. But if we talk about culture because it feels good and somebody doesn't really care about work feeling good, you're not going to reach them. But you make a business case and show like retention, and you talk about things that actually cost money to the organization and say, this will save us money, this will make us more effective, efficient, this impacts our bottom line. When you're making a business case talking about stuff that people understand and speak their language, I think that's really important. So when we talk about mentorship, we talk about work-life balance, we talk about these things, I think we also have to be aware of who we're talking to, bring it in a very tactical, strategic business case kind of sense, not just what is valuable and important to me is not necessarily the same thing to you. And I need to frame things up in a way that makes sense to you so that you can understand it in things that you value. And a lot of times when we talk about these things, there's bottom line. There's a business case for diversity, for culture, for mentorship, etc.
I love that thought. And it makes me think of the big question here. And I know this is something, the boss, being the boss. How do you have the tough conversations with the boss? He's your boss, right? We're probably on this podcast, I have to tell you, we have a tremendous amount of people that are the boss, the CEO, president, the middle managers, the general managers, who have a big following on the podcast. So they're boss. So how do you go about having a tough conversation with your boss? And why do you need to do that?
Yeah, I love this question. And I filmed many Culture Drop episodes and like videos about this and giving advice because it's really tough to do. First of all, before I answer this, I want to say, if you are a boss, this question comes up all the time. Do not be a boss that is hard to have conversations with, right? Be open and receptive to feedback. I think one of the greatest superpowers that you can have as a leader of other people is the ability to receive any feedback no matter what. That is such a power because it immediately builds trust, rapport, people, right? That like you can come to me and say anything and I will respond to it, right? Then my immediate response is tell me more about that I'm listening, I'm not defensive, that I'm immediately being like, if you're having an experience that is less than stellar and that is because of the circumstances of your job or that's because of me and our relationship, I want to know about it. I want to understand it so that I can improve that for you because as your leader, I am in service of your experience because I want you to perform well and be awesome. And I want you to keep your job. I want you to love your job. And I want you and I to have a good working relationship. So if you are a leader, please take pride in and being the kind of leader that anybody can bring anything to and you'll respond to it. People should not be afraid to give you feedback. They should not be afraid to tell you things ever. So that's my first part of the question. Part two is how do you actually have that conversation? And I think if you have a leader that is historically not necessarily open to feedback, or you think they're difficult, or they get defensive immediately when you want to bring something up to them, and you're like, how do I approach this? I think my advice a lot of times is to go in asking for advice. I think that we go into a challenging conversation asking to seek that person's input and their advice, because ultimately, how do you have a challenging conversation with a boss, especially if your boss feels challenging or defensive, is you don't want to put them on the defense. And if I come to you, George, and I'm like, hey, George, if you have a minute, right, if you've got 10 minutes or whatever to sit down, I'm having this issue, this challenge, this problem, and I would love to pick your brain. I'd love to get your perspective. I'd love to get your advice here because I'm struggling with something. I'm not really sure what to do, and I'd love to tap into your perspective on this. When I introduce and frame up the conversation like that, it automatically puts you into a receptive space of being the expert, being somebody who I'm tapping into your knowledge. It makes you feel good. And
Yeah.
so like immediately you're going to be more receptive, more open to what I have to hear. I'm coming in from a vulnerable place being like, hey, I'd love to get your perspective and pick your brain. Now, even if the conversation that I want to talk to you about is the fact that it's something that you are doing or something about our working relationship, right? Like, for example, let's say I feel like anytime that I have an idea, you immediately shoot down my idea, right? Maybe the experience I'm having is that I feel like you never listen to me or you don't listen to my ideas and you don't even give me the chance to explain why I think something would be great before you immediately are like, nope, that's not going to work because of this, right? Let's say that's the scenario. That's what I want to talk to you about. I would come to you and say, I'm having this issue. I want to pick your brain. I want to get your perspective. And when you're like, yes, cool. What is it? What's going on? I would say, the experience I'm having is this, right? I feel like I have idea that like when I bring up an idea, I'm noticing that this thing happens and I don't necessarily know what to do about it. Also, right, I don't want you to feel like I'm mad at you. You're not doing something wrong. You're not a terrible leader. I just feel like the experience I'm having is that when I have an idea, it might be brilliant, but I'm afraid to even bring it up. Or I will automatically censor those ideas, being like, there's no way George is going to like this. He's going to shoot it down. And what I would love is just an opportunity for you to give me 3 or 4 minutes to make a pitch, to share my perspective of this is why I think this would be a great idea. This is why this would help us. And I'm just stuck because I would love to get your perspective. Like when you hear that, what do you think of that? What do you think I should do? Should I keep ideas to myself? Maybe I can bring up different ideas in a different way or in a different time. I'm looking for your advice of how can I show up differently? How can this experience be different for me? What is your perspective? What do you think of this? And again, I'm not here to accuse you of being a terrible boss, but the experience I'm having doesn't feel great. And that's in this context, I don't feel listened to, and that doesn't feel great. And I don't think that's your intent. Tell me what you think. Just share your thoughts, right? That's how I pretty much approach those kinds of conversations, was for advice and putting somebody like not on the defensive, right? Just to be like, I don't know what to do. I'd like to get your input, and what is your perspective here?
I think too, also one of the things that happens, it's a good thing for all of us to remember that have a lot of experience and a lot of years doing something, is that you've probably tried most things. You've done these things, but the world changes, technology changes, technology catches up to things. So some of the very things that maybe we tried as managers 10 years ago, 20 years ago failed, but today there might be a different environment, both the opportunities from technology, the knowledge base, the whole industry might have shifted. So those things can work. So I think that's one of the things I've learned when I sit in different meetings is that your initial thing, oh, we tried that. But wait a minute, we tried that before there's iPhones, or we tried that before there's an internet. Things are different when there's a different environment out there, and then
And even
reapplying it at a different time.
and thinking about like that's the topic there is being more receptive to ideas and like maybe we could try things we haven't before. But really the crux of that conversation is that you have an employee that's having an experience that doesn't feel great to them. And the
Right.
truth is the fact that they would even bring that up to you if you're their leader is a gift, right?
Yeah.
Because the truth is most people will quit their jobs before they go tell their leader the things about their leader that they don't like because it's too risky, right? That I could damage my relationship with you and hurt my career here, right? Like most people, I guarantee you, will quit their jobs before they go and give difficult feedback to their leader. And that is a travesty because really the reality is if you have an employee that trusts you enough to come to you and say, hey, I'm having this experience that doesn't feel great or whatever, for you to, to understand that like their experience matters. If one of my employees comes to me and they're like, Galen, hey, I don't feel you never listen to me. You're not a very good listener. I feel like you never listen to me. The reality is it doesn't matter if what they're saying is true, right? Cosmically, it doesn't matter if I think I'm a good listener. It doesn't matter if everyone else on my team thinks I'm the best listener they've ever met. The reality is that this employee, this person in front of me is having an experience where they don't feel listened to by me. And that's not what I want. It's not about me. It's not about my ego. I don't need to defend, right? For me to respond, what are you talking about? I listen to you all the time, right? I listen to you. That's crazy. It's ridiculous. It's not about me. It's about them. And if somebody on my team is having an experience that isn't great, I want to improve that. The only way to respond to that is tell me more about that. What does that look like? I'm sorry to hear that sucks. I don't like hearing that. So if you can think of an example, like, what does that look like? How can I show up differently? Like, all I care about is like your experience with me. And it's so important that leaders are in that space. It's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's not about whether the idea was good or not. It's, do you want this person in front of you to feel valued? Because when people feel valued, when they feel like they trust their leaders, they work harder, they try harder, they give more effort. They do. And there's so much value in understanding that, like, get past the topic and the subjects and the outcomes and focus on like the person in front of you. And to be that kind of leader who's, hey, I want you to have a great experience here. You can always share feedback with me.
One of the things I find that really works well with that is thinking of, we talk about our customers, and I can tell you the folks that buy from Ratermann Manufacturing, they are phenomenal with their customers. And I think that I'm taking for all of us, we talk about our customers, but we internally know we have internal customers too. When we talk about our customers, we know that the perception, if it's perception, it's reality in their mind. If the bottle doesn't look good, nice and clean, and it's a 5.9 purity gas, is it really clean inside? There's a perception there. So we understand that well. And I like what you had to say there, because part of that's us thinking of what the customer's thinking about or approaching the customer. We don't wait for them to give us a call. We're approaching them. So I think there's a big piece too, how we go approach people and take that time to have discussions, or back to the investment and mentoring and things like that. So I think from my view, that's a big takeaway, is realizing everybody in our company is really a customer, not somebody that works under us, but a customer, and how do we approach them?
And that relationship with customers matters, because if you damage that, or they decide they don't want to do business with you, they'll go somewhere else. They'll take their money and their business and they'll go somewhere else. And I don't think historically that leaders and organizations have thought about it this way, but your employees can do the same thing. If they don't feel valued, if they don't like their experience, they will go somewhere else. They will work for your competitor. They'll quit their jobs, or they won't leave. They'll stay with low morale, and they'll do crappy work, and they just won't care about their jobs. Yeah. You can lose employees and have them stay on your payroll. And that is a huge thing for organizations to realize. If you treat every employee on your team like they are your customer, that you want to make them satisfied and happy, and keep them happy, because they'll keep contributing to like your success. So yeah, I love it.
I actually was thinking while you guys were having this discussion the last few minutes, how, because George always says our employees are our customers, treat them like our customers. And I was thinking how you were talking about like the workplace environment and culture. And if you don't have that to offer, you're up against a numbers game of keeping your employees. You're okay, why am I staying here? Because either you're paying me really well, or there's no other options within this same industry, which is not the case. So I guess you're just up against, I'll just keep paying them whatever I need to keep them here, but they're miserable doing crappy work. Same with customers, right? If you have nothing else to offer them other than just products, you're up against a numbers game where it's, okay, I guess I ought to cut my prices as low as I can because I give them crappy experience. So that's interesting. I like that comparison a lot.
So Galen, there's something people don't know about you, and I think it's very interesting. And we're gonna have a little bit of fun here. Then we're gonna come back to some other questions that are a little more detailed. But before that, we're gonna have a little bit of a moment. So tell me a little something that you did prior to this, something you did that is an interesting career that a lot of people might not have ever done.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Before I did this work, one of the things I did parallel to my kind of business career, I did improv. So I performed improv for many years. And for those of you that are not familiar with improv, Whose Line Is It Anyway is improv. A lot of times people mix up stand-up and improv. Stand-up is like one person on stage telling jokes. Improv is made up scenes in the moment. So if you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway, that's what I did. So I taught improv for many years. I performed improv for many years. I toured with the Whose Line guys. So Ryan Stiles and them, and I've played many shows with them. So yeah, that was a big part. That's actually how I got into doing this work with teams. Was I became the marketing and sales director for the improv theater. I was performing and teaching it, and I started doing workshop and skills training, emotional intelligence, communication, leadership, kind of team dynamics training that was like improv based activities that were relevant to business and teams and culture. So that's how I came to be in this, but part of my life for many years.
We're going to put it to the test this morning, because what I'm going to do, I don't know, it's a little bit of a surprise for everybody, but Maria, do you have a stopwatch? Of course you have one.
On my phone.
Okay, count that down. So we're going to give you I'm going to throw some words at you. And I'm going to, I don't know, maybe I think 40 seconds per word. You can knock it out really quick what that word means to you.
Is
40
that
seconds a
improv
word.
though? Improv's more like a.
This is George. Hey, this is George Ratermann improv.
I'm game for
Okay.
it. You name it. You got a thing. If
Right.
there's a time, there's a clock, and there's a countdown, I'm into it. I don't care.
Let's do
Okay.
20 seconds. 40 seconds is a long time. Is 20 seconds sound good, Galen, or what are you thinking?
Is it a rapid fire? You're going to give me many words in 40 seconds?
I'm gonna
Or I
give you,
get
I'm gonna
40
give you,
seconds per word.
yeah, I'm gonna give you a word, and you gotta in that time encapsulate what that word means because you're big on meanings of words and in the workplace. You know how that
I
means.
hope that I screw this up royally. Start the clock. Let's go. I'm into
Wait,
it.
okay. So is it 20 seconds per word? Like he has to give a sentence on it, or just like
Oh, no, we're gonna do 30 seconds to word because I know he's got many great things to say to the word.
30
So we're
seconds
gonna go
per
30.
word? Not
Yes,
rapid. Okay.
that's pretty rapid fire because he's gonna make like really explain it in 30 seconds.
Maybe. I might even end early. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, if you
Okay,
end
okay.
early, we'll
I,
just.
I have no idea what's happening, and I'm
He-
100% here for this. This
I
is
know that's
trained
why
for this. We're great.
that's why it's improv, right? You don't know what's
Okay.
going to
Okay.
happen. You don't know what word I might throw out at you. Okay, motivating.
Motivating. People are motivated by things that they care about. And I think when I think about motivating people, you have to understand people individually. People person, man. I'm like, every single person is motivated by something different. So as a leader, as a colleague, as a person, it's to tap into what people lights them up. There's something in the world that lights you up. There's like a drum beating in the distance of something that you love. I'm like, you have to go towards that. You have to follow your bliss in life. And I think it's important to understand that about other people. Other people are fascinating, but it's like, we're all different. Some people love sales, some people love business, some
Time,
people love
baby.
knitting socks.
Okay, silos.
Silos between departments in organizations. Silos, those are also part of barns and farms, but that's not what you mean. Okay.
But
The more that we create this us versus them inside organizations, a lot of times people are like, our department is busy, everyone else doesn't know what they're doing. And I think that comes back to the mentorship conversation that we had. It's so important that we cross-train people, that we spend time mixing, and we understand this inside an organization. This is how my job affects other people's jobs, and this is right, that people understand how they're working past each other and have opportunities to like co-mingle between departments. Yeah.
Good job.
okay, you got 30 seconds to get set up, Marie. You ready?
We're ready.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Oh, wait. Okay. Quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting. I already made reference to that. People can quit your job and leave without leaving their jobs and show up and do the absolute minimum. If you do not focus on employee experience and become obsessed with employee experience and want to value people and pay them well, they will stay for a paycheck, collecting a paycheck, not caring at all about your company, the success of your company, how well they're performing. Like, quiet quitting is just a version of people being like, I have low morale. This company doesn't care about me, and why would I try hard for them? It's easy
Great.
to counter.
Okay,
Become
next one.
obsessed with employee experience. Go.
Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Disciplining.
Disciplining. Yes, disciplining. Oh my gosh. We're talking about accountability. And I think that, man, this ties into the conversation about culture so much. 30 seconds is torturous for me to talk
You
about.
got to do it. You
Okay,
only have 14 seconds.
No, we'll keep going. Holding people accountable has to be about understanding who are we, what are the behaviors that are acceptable here inside this organization, and what are we committed to? People, if we're clear and committed about our culture, we don't have to we stop having to put out fires of like people's poor behavior. Man, there's so much here about
You got to do the
culture.
bell, Marie.
Yeah, bell's over.
Ding,
Thank
ding,
you.
ding. I was giving him
Okay.
40 seconds on that
We're
one.
going back to that. We're going back to that conversation.
All right,
That's
next
good.
word.
Culture.
We got a couple more words to go. Open-minded.
Open-minded. Yeah, people have to be open-minded. Having a growth mindset, right? Which means being open to learning, growing, improving. Being open-minded is the opposite of ego, right? It's about, I'm not important here. What is important is the success of this company, the success of this team, to be in a space of being receptive to other people's ideas. Improv, we talked about, is a lot about saying yes. That's kind of the core of improv, is about being open to other people's ideas and receptive to what is possible, instead of seeing all the barriers and here's all the ways this can't work. It's what is possible. What are the ways that this can work? Yeah, that's it. My
Ding,
30
ding.
seconds up. I can't say anymore. I got more to say, but I can't.
Okay, next one. Ready?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Okay, you almost got to put a jersey on for this one. Being a coach.
Being
Oh.
a coach. Yeah, when we think about coaching people, giving them feedback, it's about being invested in their success, right? It's like we have to think of, so feedback is something that gets a negative sort of connotation, because we think of feedback. First of all, a lot of organizations only do feedback downhill. People in positions of power give feedback to people below them, which is ridiculous, because how do those people improve? How do you improve up the chain? We have to see feedback as coaching, not criticism. We have to give it as that. It's, I am here for your success. You have to be here for mine, which means that we also have to be open to receiving feedback as leaders, not just giving feedback as leaders. That's 30 seconds.
Ding, ding.
That
was great.
Every one of these topics I could talk for like ever.
Well, okay.
But I love it. I love it.
Okay, just ready for this? Mean people are mean.
Yeah, get rid of them. Get rid of mean people.
Perfect.
A lot of organizations are afraid to fire people that are jerks. High-performing, toxic people need to go. You need to decide who you are as a company. Do we allow people to be mean? Because the truth is that you either keep people that are toxic, you'll lose people either way. You either lose the people that they work with because they can't stand working with this person, or you lose the person who's causing the drama and the problem inside your organization. You have to be able to let people go. You have to fire.
Okay.
Excellent.
Your meaning of happy at work. Your meaning of happy.
Happy at work. To feel like, for me, that's, I think in generally, I think it's to feel like you're surrounded by people who are intentional, who are kind, who are positive, who are pulling their weight and contributing to something that's awesome. A company that does good work, does it well, is being successful. I want to know that I am making an impact either on the rest of the team, the customers inside the organization, the people around me. It's like happiness to me is being surrounded by people who are intentional, who love to work together, who are doing great things and doing it well together, feeling like I belong. I'm part of a team.
Okay.
Welcome. All right, it's 30.
You did it. You did it.
I love it.
Man, you knocked those out.
Rapid.
Sure did.
That's great. Great job. That was
so
fun.
much to say about any one of those topics, man.
And you had no idea that was coming at you. You just went right at it.
Did it.
I think we just did it. I think that 5 minutes was probably, or 8 minutes was probably an hour and a half podcast we put in that little time period. One of the things I want to come back to, I think it's emotional intelligence, right? We keep hearing so much about emotional intelligence. And that's another one that you go to so many meetings hearing about that. Maria, I'm sure you've heard that in a lot of meetings, emotional intelligence. There's books out about it and all that good stuff. And
I remember you did an emotional intelligence course for employees at Ratermann a while back. And it was it blew my mind.
Yeah. But the thing I found interesting about that, one, I want you to describe that word to begin with, emotional intelligence, so we're all on the same page, emotional intelligence. And the other piece, though, is how do we know? We all probably think we're pretty good with folks. We think we're compassionate and thoughtful and all the things you need to have good emotional intelligence. How do you know? And maybe you don't have good emotional intelligence. How do you figure out if you've got good emotional intelligence?
Yeah, great questions. We'll just take those one at a time because they're big things.
They are.
Emotional intelligence, big topic. Lots you can Google about it and learn about it. But basically, there's the basic understanding. There's kind of 4 pillars of that. So it's like self-awareness, knowing yourself, self-management, being able to regulate your own emotions, understand what motivates you, etc. Social awareness, so your ability to read other people, read other situations, and interpret what's happening around you. And then relationship management, so the ability to build trust, to build bonds with other human beings and make connections and relationships. All really important. The ability to understand and work with people. These are generally referred to as kind of soft skills. I think they're critical skills for leaders. I think that you need to be hiring for emotional intelligence. I think if you're going to put anyone into a leadership position at all, they need to have high emotional intelligence. That's absolutely critical, that they understand themselves. They know how to behave. They know how to build relationships. They can read other people. There's clear examples of this. For example, if you're frustrated, my ability to be able to interpret and intuit and understand through circumstances and reading your body language and stuff like that. Are you frustrated at me? Are you frustrated at a situation? My ability to discern other people's emotions is incredibly important, and as well as do that for myself, right? If I'm frustrated, that I am able to sort through and identify and express, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm thinking, understand what the root of that is, right? The self-awareness kind of piece of myself, and also an element of self-management. So for example, if you and I are having a conversation, maybe I'm really mad at you, right? So in terms of self-regulation, so an example of kind of emotional intelligence in a situation like that, when it's needed, is that I can be really frustrated with you and speak calmly. I don't have to yell. I don't have to insult you, right? I can express, hey, I'm feeling extremely frustrated right now. When we yell at people, when we lose our cool, when we're not in charge of our sort of emotional behavior, that's a sign of high emotional intelligence versus low emotional intelligence. I can be upset at you and I can also treat you well. I can speak in a calm voice and also express to you that I'm extremely angry, right? I don't have to yell at you. I don't have to throw things. I don't have to insult you. So like that, just as a critical, concrete example of emotional intelligence is like self-management, self-awareness, and relationship management. I understand that if I yell at you and I throw things at you when I'm mad at you, it's going to damage your trust in me and our relationship. So I'm just using this example as conflict as an example. It's not only thing emotional intelligence is about, but I understand that if you and I can navigate a challenging conversation or challenging conflict, that's going to strengthen our relationship. It's going to build your trust in me to know that if we have conflict, that I'm going to move through that conflict in a calm way, in a way that's focused on resolution, that I make you feel listened to, right? All of those things are examples of emotional intelligence. It's critically important. It's basically, do you understand yourself? Do you understand people? Can you build relationships? It's to navigate the world of people. It is everything, right? It's everything that's all encompassing to be like, how well can you manage and move through the world? Can you communicate with different people and different communication styles, right? And that kind of stuff. So that, to give a sort of crash course very quick, that's emotional intelligence. Yeah.
But see, we're sitting there. It's like the person that sometimes people say, man, I'm a really good singer. And you go to listen to them sing and they're not so good at singing, right? They think they're very good at it.
Yeah.
But so how do we test ourselves to know if we're actually doing what we think we're doing with emotional intelligence?
Yeah,
Is there a litmus test of some sort we can take?
I think there's a number of different ways that we can test that. One of the ways is through feedback, right? Other people experience you differently than you perceive and experience yourself. So asking for feedback from people is a great way to understand, like, how do you impact other people? Are you self-awareness is a big part of that. I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can understanding emotional intelligence is important, right? Even that example, if people have never heard of or they don't understand emotional, how do I know if I have emotional intelligence? The understanding deeply what emotional intelligence is and what are examples of high emotional intelligence and low emotional intelligence, if you truly want to know, because you asked the question of like, how do I know if I have high emotional intelligence or not? People with low emotional intelligence don't care. They don't want to know. They don't ask the question. They're not interested in finding out, because another piece of that is growth mindset, right? Is finding out that you have areas of opportunity in terms of improving your emotional intelligence, but also leaning into that, wanting to learn. A sign of a high emotional intelligence is wanting to have a higher emotional intelligence. A sign of low emotional intelligence to be like, that's foo-foo stuff, whatever, it's touchy-feely crap, it's garbage. Somebody says that about emotional intelligence, if that's
There's
you,
a test.
yeah, test completed, you have areas of opportunity to improve.
So if they don't think there's much value in it, then that's the test to say
I
you
think
probably.
that's definitely because it's like you're telling me there's no value in you understanding and having control over your own emotional behavior, understanding and being able to interpret and read other people's emotions, and understanding how to build relationships that are healthy and have trust with other people. If you're telling me those things are important, first of all, good Lord, I hope you're not in a leadership position and be of all okay. They are important, right? They are important. How we impact other people matters. As leaders, as coworkers, as human beings in our romantic relationships and our friendships, it matters. And I think that the first key for most people, if it's like, hey, I want to know if I have emotional intelligence or high emotional intelligence, I want to know where my areas of opportunity are to improve mine. I think starting with understanding what is there's hours and hours of free blogs, research you can Google and look up stuff. Like, you can learn a lot about emotional intelligence, and through that sort of understand, when you say self-management, what does that mean? And then through that, I think there's doing some self-assessments, asking for feedback from your team, from people around you, from the people that you're friends with, right? I think that there are ways to identify your own areas of opportunity when it comes to this, but it takes a growth mindset. It takes vulnerability, which is also a symbol of high emotional intelligence, is someone who's willing to be vulnerable, whose ego is not more important than their like other people's perception of them and stuff, right? Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very juicy, awesome topic. I think it's important, but organizations that want to hire well, that want to have great leaders and be successful, I think they need to be focusing on and indexing on and understanding high emotional intelligence and putting people into positions of high emotional intelligence. The ability to like give and receive feedback, the ability to navigate conflict well, the ability to navigate and be open and receptive to change. These are all things that denote high emotional intelligence, to lead other people, to communicate well with other people. All of these things are critical.
It leads me into a thought. I know you're big about this. When we grew up, my mother and my grandmother would say, if you don't have something nice to say about somebody, don't say anything. And so that was like a rule we had around the kitchen table, dining table. If you don't have something nice, you You shouldn't be saying something about somebody because rumors are there, gossip, all the things people can do. And I know you have a very strong feeling about bad mouthing and people bad mouthing in the workplace or rumoring and all. I like to touch and get your perspective of that.
Yeah, I've got two things. One inspired by the first thing you said, and second, I think that gossip, bad mouthing, talking smack about other people behind their back, I think is absolute cancer to culture inside organizations. I think it's something that organizations and teams need to have a zero tolerance policy for, right? That we do not badmouth other people. If you have a problem with somebody else, you go right to the source, you sort it out with them, right? When we speak about other people inside this organization, it's to lift them up. I think having crystal clear guidelines around that kind of stuff, that we do not allow or tolerate toxic bad mouthing. It's so destructive. It's cruel, and it's really toxic and damaging to teams and morale. And I also, going back to the first thing you said, which is like, we don't have something nice to say about something, don't say anything at all. I think there is also a very, and I'm not pointing this directly at you, but there is a very old school kind of thing of we don't talk about what's difficult. We hide it. We avoid difficult conversations. And I think a newer, better version of that, and a better, like, heightened, healthier version of you as a human being, and this is for every person in the world, is like have the skills and the knowledge and the courage and the ability to have difficult conversations, so that when you have, for example, bad things to say about other people, like if I have a strained relationship with a coworker or somebody else, I have the ability to go to that person and say, hey, we need to have a difficult conversation. And for me to invest in myself and level up my own skills and the ability to have difficult conversations, to navigate conflict well and productively, right? To not see conflict as war, but an opportunity to build trust and build better experiences for other people. I think that there is a way to, instead of avoiding things that are uncomfortable and discomfort, that we can level up our own abilities and skills so that we can navigate those things where it's like, instead of bad mouthing somebody else, if I have a damaged relationship with somebody else, I actually have the opportunity to go and repair that relationship with that person, have a difficult conversation, improve that relationship, so that I no longer have bad things to say about them. So anyways, I
think all managers would prefer that. I think all folks working in a place prefer that, where that's back to an investment of time, where when you're reaching out and talking to people, and also you're having discussions and asking those hard questions. Because if we're back to mentoring, if it's a person doesn't know where they need to work on something or what the issue is, and they can't work on it and they can't develop and grow, and that's not fair to the person at the same time. So I think what you're really defining to say there is that whether you're my age or any age, I think I just felt like I got become in that other age of being an older person. I still think I'm 25, but I guess maybe I'm looking a little different. But either way, really the fact that you're having that conversation with them and the opportunity for them to understand what the situation, grow with it, versus somebody going and just talking about somebody behind their back, because that does no value. There's no benefit to that other than creating a toxic culture. I believe, is that correct what you're saying?
Yeah. I think that's definitely, there's a lot of layers to that conversation. Yes, it is true.
Yeah. But what I liked about it is what I really like about it is you're not saying we just ignore things. You're saying we address the issue with the person and have that conversation. Now, there are meetings with managers that have to discuss things. Let's talk about that a little bit. You're in a meeting discussing things about folks working under you, having a team, their management teams together. And that conversation should be constructive conversation. Okay, we have these issues. What do we think we could do? What things can we do to help this person? Or is this a toxic person that should not be in an organization?
Yep.
That's different than bad mouthing somebody, correct?
Absolutely is. Yes. And those conversations are important as long as they're not intended to be cruel and mean and just make that person, cast them in a bad light and do nothing about it. If I have somebody on my team and I'm having a conversation with, as leaders, about this person, their performance, their behavior, that it's not up to snuff, I also need to go to that person and coach them, give them feedback, bring them up into greatness. Like you said, with mentorship, you can't fix a problem that you don't know you have. And the ability to have those conversations, to coach people, to point out, make them aware of their areas of opportunity, right? Whether that's their performance or their behavior, we have to be able to do that. That's important. And it ties back to like many things we've talked about, the ability to do that. Who has an easier time doing those kinds of conversations? People with high emotional intelligence, which is why you should put people with high emotional intelligence into leadership positions, right? Yeah. Because they don't see conflict as this war and this battle. They can self-manage, they can, it's so important. All these things it's like an ecosystem. And you're right, it's okay to have conversations about employees and about people, as long as it's not, the point of that conversation is to cast that person in a bad light and talk smack about them. It's like, okay, if we notice that we're having issues with a team, with people, we need to also have the ability and skills to go and address those things, coach them, and improve them. That's our leaders.
I know myself as a manager, some of my most rewarding moments have been those opportunities to have that tough conversation
Yeah.
and people most of the time really appreciate it, especially if you're delivering it the correct way and trying to help.
Yep.
It's all based on trying to help and bring them to another spot, and that usually helps. From my view, that's very rewarding when you see somebody get the benefits of that time you spend together.
I have a question for you, Galen. What if you have, and I'm not saying this is something I've observed at Ratermann, but I have observed it through my work experience. And what if you have a leader? So they're one of the top leaders, and people come to them with frustrations that they should be addressing as that leader, and they're in control of the frustrations that these people are coming to them with. But instead of looking at themselves and saying, oh, these are probably coming from me, or these are issues I can help with, they bond with that person by bad mouthing other upper management of, oh, you know what, this problem probably isn't coming from me. This is probably just coming from the next person up. And then they get together as a group and bad mouth upper management. It's interesting because, and that person is also upper management. How do you deal with an environment where someone is like they're bonding over, oh, it's probably this? Does that make sense what I just said? I
It
know I
does
just
make
talked in
100%
circles.
sense. And there's like
Okay.
just so much to unpack there. It gets into the culture
Yeah.
conversation as well. And we talk about integrity, that if I am a leader in this organization, will I badmouth, right? If I have to I'm in charge of delivering a decision that I don't agree with, right? Or somebody's frustrated about something coming to me. For me to have that, to take that opportunity to like, I'm going to bond with this person by also bad mouthing leadership, somebody else, another department. It's just very low integrity behavior. It's low accountability, right? To be like, if those issues exist, then taking an honest look at what here can we have influence over? What do we have control over? What can we do about the situation to improve it? And taking responsibility to do that, to be like, to either to be able to honestly assess, these are things that we have control over. These are things that we don't have control over. These are things that we have influence over that we can, and it's like doing what we can to improve those things is like high integrity, right? High accountability, as opposed to, let's say the leadership makes a decision and it gets down to the middle level management, and the manager of a team knows that this is going to be an unpopular decision. So they, this is dumb. We have to do this now. It undermines what upper leadership is trying to do, and automatically guarantees that everybody below them, that their team is not going to buy into this thing, that they're going to create an us versus them environment, going back to silos, which is one of the words that we talked about, of this us versus them, leadership versus employees. And like, that is such a really dangerous, toxic thing for leaders to do, it's like, I can also be honest. I don't have to pretend that I love a decision, right? If I'm having a conversation with my team, I can be like, hey, my initial reaction to this was this. These are the things that came up for me, but this is our reality, and this is how we need to thrive. This is how we need to move forward, right? This is what we do and don't have control over. So this is how we can be successful together. We don't have to pretend that we like something that we don't, but how we respond to that, how we communicate about that is really important. And I think that what you're describing happens a lot in middle level management. I want to bond with my team because I want them to like me, but as a result, I create this division between us and them. And I also model for my employees on my team, it's okay to badmouth people. It's okay to create this us versus them mentality versus we are one unified team. And if we have a problem with something, we should be able to go and talk about it. And like, I do know what you're talking about. It's rampant in organizations, and it's a symptom of low integrity, low accountability culture. And there's a conversation around that is, okay, as we build culture, what does that mean inside an organization? That there's a fundamental sort of shift to those types of things happening and how we address and drive culture and talk about culture inside organizations, that is a thing that we don't do here, and so it doesn't take place, which it's a broader, bigger conversation. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
I appreciate the
But
question.
addressing it is yeah, it is fixable if addressed, it sounds like.
I mean, sometimes you can't do anything about that, right? It's like these people are dealing with these frustrations. Is something like being able to assess whether something is in or outside of your control and in or outside of your sphere of influence, right? And to be able to honestly understand that this is something we are not going to, like, the company is adopting a brand new software and everybody's going to have to use this new software. I don't like this software. The option is not, we're going to change the software or this team doesn't have to adopt it. That's not a solution here. But it's okay, how do we understand what you don't like about the software? How do we give you training? How do we help you through that change? Because it is not inside our influence of like control that we can be like, okay, we're not going to adopt this software as an organization. That's already happening. So this is a perfect example of something I think is common inside organizations where this team hates this thing and their leaders, oh yeah, it sucks, versus the reality is that this is our new software. And so how do we make sure that we are successful with this? How do we move through this? Whether we like it or not, it's got some changes, it's different, but like change is growth, change is progress. And sometimes change isn't as good as it was before, but the reality is that we cannot change this. This is our reality. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we be successful? How do we thrive? How do we move forward as a team if this is our reality and we don't have impact? We cannot change this decision. So like, I think just being able to assess, we can change this or we can't, we have to live with this, or we have some influence, we can go have a conversation, we can give input, or we need to accept it. And I think that's understanding those elements as a team member, as a leader inside an organization as well. So we can convey those things to my team. If my team is upset about this new software, me saying, yeah, it sucks, creates us versus them. Me saying, talking through that with my team to be like, hey, this is what came up for me too. These things are going to be a little different. It's going to look like this now. How do we get really good at this software? How do we thrive? Because this is our new reality, I think is a much more positive, healthy way to approach that, right? Is like having those conversations. Not all change is great. And I'm like, if we just are positive about it, it'll be positive. That's not the reality of business. But what you're talking about is so toxic for me to exhibit, right? To model that in front of my employees, to be like, oh yeah, this sucks. Management, they don't get it. They're so stupid. That it's so toxic. It's now every person on my team thinks management is stupid, right? It undermines the like integrity of the entire organization and our culture to create that kind of thing versus, hey guys, some changes aren't things that we're going to love. So how do we thrive inside what is true for us and be awesome as a team, et cetera, et cetera. So
That's great.
Galen, I was going to go to another spot. I have to say that in the last 5 years, I think the amount of change, the amount of things coming at us as managers, as all the folks working in an organization, the change is rampant. The unknown of what might be coming. We're constantly hearing about a recession, or we're constantly hearing about one thing or another, or war breaks out. All the different things we're hearing every day to worry about, all the things that might be going to happen. And then worry is a tough thing, right? For all of us, it takes a lot of energy, takes a lot out of you. I'd like to talk a little about worry because I know you have a viewpoint on worry and how you manage worrying.
Yeah, I have perspective about that. I think a lot of times worrying about things that might happen is like suffering an outcome that isn't true yet. Not that we are blind or not aware of what's going on, but I think it's like how much time do we want to spend fretting about things that may come versus being present and in the moment to be like, we're going to do the best that we can right now with what we have. And knowing that if things come, let's say there's a huge recession, let's say these things come to pass that we're worried about. There's also opportunities in there. So to see change and things moving forward is like, there are going to be opportunities, even if these things come to pass that aren't great. But I think it's really important that we don't spend all of our time being like, what if this, what if that, and suffering these outcomes of things that like aren't necessarily true. There may be a huge recession. There may not be a huge recession. So we have to do business the best that we can right now and make decisions and move forward and stay present right here. It's like when those things, the prime example recently, I had this conversation with my dad that there's this place that I was staying down in Palm Springs. This is going to be very dated if we put this in the podcast but there was recently like a big storm, the Hurricane Hillary, that hit like Palm Springs. And so my dad was like, what about the house that you're staying? What about the kind of stuff? So I was like, I don't know. It's like, because I'm planning on going there, but I don't know if the house is flooded or not. My dad like, not worry about it. And I'm like, Dad, if something terrible happened, I'll pivot and react to that thing. But I'm not going to spend a lot of energy being like, what if he texted me like 5 times. And I'm like, you think about anything other than fretting over this possible negative outcome. I can't spend my time worrying about something terrible happening because it takes me out of the moment. If I find out something terrible has happened, I'm going to pivot. I'm going to respond to that, do the best that I can and move forward. But I think it's so important that we remain right now present in the moment. When it comes
Right.
to
So the challenge with that is, though, at the same time, as business leaders, we have to be thinking ahead of the things that might be going to happen. So there's some kind of a contingency plan, right? What if this happens? Like for us, we have a contingency plan on the West Coast. If an earthquake happens and does something to our facility, what if a hurricane hits our facility in Houston? What if a tornado hits our facility in Nashville? So we have contingency plans. So I don't think you're saying you don't have plans.
Of course.
I think so maybe just touch that for a moment.
Yeah, I think it's important to be prepared, right? If this happens, here's what we'll do as a result. I just think that we have those things in place, or there's things that we can or can't anticipate. And then we just let it, right? We make decisions collectively together. We talk about what are the things that can go wrong? What are the things that can go right? If things go wrong, I think it's important to be prepared. I think it's important to have a contingency plan. If COVID was a perfect example of that, what if everybody all of a sudden 2 weeks from now had to work from home? How do we solve that, right? There are organizations that were already doing that, so it didn't impact them. But companies that had never thought about that ever really struggled and scrambled to figure out how that was going to happen. anticipating things, being ready for potentially stuff to happen and talking about what will we do if this happens is great. But having that plan, having something in place that is sound and thought through, put that on the shelf and then don't spend your whole life worrying about it. It's like we have to have a plan. We have to talk about this thing. If a tornado, if we have to shut down this thing, what will we do as a result? It's great to have those kind of contingencies, especially like right in manufacturing or organizations where there's just specifics, whereas people have to be on site. So what if we can't do that? It's important to talk through those things and have a contingency plan and be prepared. It's not just don't worry about anything. That's not it. But I think we can't stay in the space of being in stasis. We can't move forward. We don't know what's going to happen. There's always going to be uncertainty. There's always going to be change in industry, and we're going to face that and we're going to deal with it the best that we can in the moment. But we have to continue to move forward even when we don't have all the answers. And you kind of initially were talking about change, and it's like there's going to be change. Change is constant. We live in a very ever-changing landscape of business and industry and customers, and that is going to continue to be true. So knowing that is continuing to be true, how do we move forward? How do we thrive? How do we be successful?
Yeah. And I know, using that as a great point, we had a contingency plan on the West Coast in case an earthquake happened, because they can red tag a building. You can't go back in.
Yep.
So we put a lot of things in place, computers and colos, remote phone systems, all kinds of things. And we had things set up for remote working. So for us, interesting enough, we were the first county that got shut down during the pandemic. We were actually given about 4 hours notice that we had to vacate our buildings and go home. And we did that. We were up and running the next morning without, there's a few little hiccups, but not much, because we enacted our earthquake plan, and it worked pretty smoothly. You're right. Having things in place is but I will also say we didn't worry about an earthquake every day, because we'd just be worrying to worry. So you put things in place. But to wrap up here, I wanted to come back to this word and wrap up and have a discussion about curiosity, because I've seen curiosity in different things I've read on other books. I've seen people looking at how powerful the word curiosity can be. And I know that's a big word for you in your vocabulary as well. I wanted to see if you could maybe touch on how people can use curiosity in their workplace, could be in their personal life as well, but in their workplace to really benefit them.
Yeah, I think that when we come from a place of curiosity in general about other people, about their experiences, about stuff, it puts us in a place of like non-judgment, but learning. Going back to the examples of stuff that we talked about in this podcast, if you're coming to me saying, "Hey, Galen, you never listen to my ideas," or whatever, like immediately I'm going to be in a space of to train your brain to be in a space of sort of like, tell me more about that. Let me understand that. Let me learn about that as an initial reaction instead of feel defensive. I think something here that I talk about in some of the workshops that I do around like giving and receiving feedback and building a culture of feedback is the ability to, or also just to navigate situations of conflict or delivering a no. One thing I think is really important for people to have as in their tool belt as a skill for themselves is the ability to postpone judgment. The ability to just for a minute, for 2 minutes, for 5 minutes, to postpone having an opinion about something and just listen and ask questions. Let's say you share an idea and I think it's the worst idea I've ever heard. It's like for me to just take a moment to be like, tell me more about that. Why do you like that idea? Where are you coming from? To be curious for 10 seconds and just listen is really powerful. And I think whether that is in conflict, in feedback, in dealing with other people, and hearing ideas, I think our ability to just tap into that curiosity and like postpone having an opinion until I have more information. I think that as human beings, we're just opinion machines. We're hardwired to have an opinion about everything instantly at every moment. And the ability to be like, I don't know how I feel about that. I need to think about that. I need to ponder on that. I need to chew on that. Tell me more about what you're thinking. Why do you like that idea? Where are you coming from? I think is such a powerful place for us to be in a space of learning and right. Instead of knowing, it's like, it's not important for me to know and be right. It's important for me to learn and understand. And I think that the shift for those two things it has a huge impact on the way that you navigate business situations, people, relationships, friendships, other human beings, of just the ability to postpone an opinion and learn and listen. And
I was going to say, as a young professional, when I first started at Ratermann, I think because George is my dad and my older sister also worked at Ratermann, and he raised us to be like, boss's daughter is not a thing. You're not getting special treatment. You need to earn your stripes, prove yourself, all of that. So I think I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder with that. And I was very defensive in most conversations. And I was very defensive when I'd bring a new idea to the table and it received different feedback or like questions around it. And this is cheesy, but through meditation and a lot of like emotional intelligence training, that's my buzzwords for myself. I always make goals for myself every year. And starting last year, so the last 2 years, it's been all about curiosity and authenticity. So when someone says something that sparks something in me that makes me defensive, one, I have curiosity of why am I being defensive right now? And two, it's curiosity in, oh, I wonder why they have that perspective, or I wonder what thoughts they're thinking or ideas they have around this. And it has helped so much just coming in with a curiosity first mindset to put my guards down and not be as defensive.
I love that. I love that. And also like the curiosity, not just in hearing the idea and tell me more about that from you, but like curiosity to be like, why am I so opposed to that idea? Why is my
Yeah.
initial reaction to feel defensive to that? And that we get deep into who we are as human beings and understanding ourselves, but it's like it could be that you telling me that I never listened to you, right, triggers something in me of being attacked, like criticized, right? Where it's like you're talking about your experience of me. You're not coming here to criticize me, but like that triggers in me this defensiveness of like, what? I'm a good listener. I care about what you have to say. But me understanding that curiosity of like, why does this make me feel like I need to defend myself when this person is simply sharing their experience with me and their experience isn't great, but they're not necessarily attacking me. They're just saying, I'm experiencing this thing that I don't love. And I think that like that curiosity for yourself and owning your own kind of reactions and owning your own triggers of like, why does that bother me so much? Or when somebody else has an idea, why do I feel the need to point out everything that wouldn't work about it first? Why is that my initial reaction to poke holes in this thing versus be like, okay, let's postpone that for a second. Let's be like, what could work about that? So I think being curious, having self curiosity as well to understand and own those reactions, own those triggers, own like, why does this make me feel defensive? Why am I reacting this way to this thing? Why is it so emotional to me when it's obviously not that big of a deal? So I think that's brilliant and beautiful. And again, it speaks to emotional intelligence. It's like those types of ways to move through the world. And like, those are the kinds of skills and traits that you want in people that are in leadership positions. They can do these things. They have these conversations. They see value in this kind of stuff because the impact of that on the, like just you adopting that for yourself and having a clear understanding of yourself and evolving who you are as a human being. Marie, in your career, when you become a leader, when you're a senior leader inside an organization, you're going to be a more valuable part of that team, right? Because you are more self-aware, you're more intentional about how you show up, you're more aware about how you impact other people. That is a benefit to the people that you work with. It's a benefit to the people that you lead. So this is why we have to focus on these things and care about hiring people for emotional intelligence. And right, you're going to impact people in a different way just by being able to, like, when something makes you feel defensive, you're the kind of person who is self-aware enough and intentional enough to be like, why does this make me feel defensive, and challenge that in yourself and maybe lessen, like, I'll take a leader who acts like that over someone who doesn't all day long. So yeah, really powerful.
One of the things I find when you have that curiosity, it's almost a tenfold in how much you're actually really hearing somebody and what you're really listening to. Because all of us can be so ready to give an answer. We're thinking about that answer we're going to give back versus stopping. When you use curiosity, you really are listening and hearing it. And by listening and hearing that, I think that brings out all the other elements that you have a bit deeper understanding. And then you can even have a lot more empathy and understanding of where that person's coming from versus just giving them an answer back. So I find it a tremendously powerful tool to have that curiosity. It takes a little more time sometimes, but again, that's an investment. I keep coming back to that. I think all these things are investments and they pay off dividends in the long term.
Absolutely agree. Completely agree.
Marie, you are today on the High Pressure Podcast from the Tipping Point Podcast. Do you have any other things you would like to ask?
Yeah, maybe it's selfish for me to ask this because I'm biased as your daughter, but it's just like burning in my head now. So, Dad/George, I never call you dad in a work environment, but I watched you start Ratermann Manufacturing, and everything Ratermann was started on was culture. Now you have the Solution Center, and I'm giving Ratermann a big shout out right now, but the Solution Center, and every room has a different theme. Everything provokes different thoughts. You have a speakeasy in there. You have an old bank vault that's now turned into the idea vault, where you walk in, you get a key, you open the lockbox, and it has provoking questions in there that provoke difficult conversations and really fun, inspiring conversations. And just everything at Ratermann is around culture. When you do every year, even when Ratermann was making no money, you hosted a Ratermann employee party where spouses were invited, and you just wined and dined them to the top, and always made sure everything was just so fun in those 3-day events, and did a lot of training. I guess my question to you, George, and hopefully this, Galen, you can add into any insights here, but like, why did you start Ratermann as culture first? Like, how did you know to do that when working at your parents' company? It's not like Grandpa was a big culture guy. He was very old school. in how he conducted business. So I'm just curious how that came about.
Boy, man, oh man, talk about being improv here.
I don't,
I gotta
I really hyped you up too. I'm really kissing
appreciate
your
that.
ass
That
a
was
little,
great.
but
For me, the culture came from, I think I have a high emotional intelligence with people, and I enjoy seeing people grow, develop. I enjoy people being happy. I also know how to work hard, and I think people can really enjoy working and getting things accomplished. It's not just having fun. It's there's an enjoyment out of getting something to fruition. And I really enjoy watching and seeing people do that. I watch and grow people, seeing people grow. I also want to grow myself. And to grow myself, I really had to be that way. So I think I had an opportunity in years of making sales calls in all different kinds of industries. I would ask a lot of questions, open minded, and I'd hear a lot of feedback from people. And I think I took different pieces of things that I saw making all those sales calls in accounts and experiences that I had with customers. And also, as I came up through the ranks, what motivated me and what did not motivate me. So I think I was very fortunate to be able to call on so many different industries, really be in the inside of those organizations and see what worked, what didn't work, and sometimes I didn't even know what to call it or describe it. I could just see it happening. So I think that's a big part of it for me. Culture, if you build the right culture, it is a lot of fun. It's a very exciting thing to come to work. When I started Ryder Manufacturing, I had a couple basic rules. I was going to enjoy coming to work every day. Everybody working for me would be coming to work every day, looking forward to coming to work. We're all going to grow a little bit every day, be a little bit better every day, and be able to look in the rearview mirror and say, look where we got to. That's where really, for me, the culture came from.
Galen, I don't know if there's I don't know how to phrase a question to you, but what are your thoughts that come to mind there?
Yeah, I think it's great. The other thing that I don't think this is a calculated, sinister thing, but I think the other thing that George understood about that is that it's strategic. When people like coming to work, when they enjoy being there, they're more creative, they're more innovative, they're more collaborative, they work harder, they have higher morale, they want to show up to work. It's how you retain employees, it's how you get them to care about their work and try harder and make less mistakes. It's strategic. Like, yes, you want to have fun every day at work, but also you want an employee force. The reason you're having 3-day company parties with employees and stuff like that and treating them well and stuff like that is because you want them to feel valued and cared about. And I think genuinely, George, I think genuinely you are that person. I think you genuinely care about people. And I think you genuinely care about making people feel valued. And also, equally, it's strategic and important and smart because guess what? I bet you a lot of those people still work for you however many years later, right? You talk about retention,
Yeah.
you talk about keeping people and having loyalty and people caring about their jobs. It's like if you prove to people that you care about them as human beings, they will show up for you. And I think that's why culture matters. It's not just this foo-foo, like haha raw stuff that's just, oh, okay, fun, work-life balance. If people love coming to work and they like the way that they're treated and they feel like their company cares about them, they will stay there. They're not going to leave for an extra $4 or $5 an hour. Like people will stay in their jobs, right? Like you retain people, they work harder. You have to put out less fires. You have less silos between departments. If you're like, we need to feel good as a company, like culture matters here. And I think it's not just, it's the right thing to do because why would we want people to suffer? But also it's strategic, it's smart business. And like any organization that is not prioritizing employee experience and culture is like losing out on discretionary effort, loyalty, retention. They're losing out on things that actually impact and cost you a lot of money if you don't have them. And
Yeah,
I
I
think it's
appreciate what you
beautiful.
have to say, and I appreciate what you have to say. And I think a big piece from my view is it's got to absolutely be genuine. It has to be
Yes.
really heartfelt. You have to really mean it. A lot of words can be said. You can say we have culture, we care about culture, but how you take actions, you walk the talk. That's a big part of it. I think it has to be genuine. And it's for me, it's an everyday development of myself. If I'm not developing myself every day and being aware of changes, constantly having a feedback system with myself, then the organization will grow past me. And I've got it. So it's a challenge every day for me to keep improving and developing. And I think that's a benefit for me. It keeps me enthralled. I get excited every day to come to work, and we have the next thing we're going to accomplish. So it is strategic, but it is very genuine at the same time.
Of course. And it can be both. And that's the juice, I think. So
Yeah. Galen, I do have one more question for you. I know in some of your videos you talk about the fact that if someone is toxic and doesn't fit your culture, that you need to get them out of your organization and ultimately fire them. How do you deal with, do you need to worry about workplace gossip of, oh, people are getting hired and then they're leaving versus no, we're actually taking the steps to make sure this person's not at our organization because they don't fit the culture and we are firing them?
yeah, I wouldn't. interesting kind of question, because you don't want to be like, hey, we fired this person, they didn't quit. There's a certain level of that. But I think you touting and talking about the culture that you have, I think broadly we can make it known to employees that we only employ people here that fit, that are in our culture, that show up in our culture, that contribute to our culture in a meaningful way that makes sense. And I think it's okay to, you don't have to say, hey, this specific person that we got rid of because they weren't a good culture fit. I think collectively the narrative and the story that you're telling about your culture to your employees and to the outside world is that we will make difficult choices to remove people from this organization if they don't show up and be exceptional, if they are not a good fit for us and our culture and how we want to be here. And I think that's really important, and acknowledging that, to be like, that is a positive thing, right? Knowing what your culture is, knowing what it looks like, and being committed to that, which means that if somebody is going to show up and act out of alignment with that culture in some way or another, and that's not acceptable there, right? That's okay to do. That conversation can be problematic because it also speaks to like bias and those kinds of things, right? That we're just keeping people that are just like us. But I think that when you have a clearly defined culture, you are making decisions based on how clearly defined that culture is and exactly what that looks like. What does it mean to be successful here? Going back to the very, very first thing I said in the very beginning, which is like, what are the ground rules of engagement of what it means to be part of this team? And I have a very clearly defined culture inside my team. And the work that I do with organizations is around defining crystal clear with culture. And I don't mean values, I don't mean trust, integrity, respect, teamwork, fun, right? If you want to say excellence, tell me what that looks like in practice. And so for example, just to give you, I won't talk on this forever and ever, but like inside so we have our kind of 5 tenets of our culture, and then very crystal clear behaviors of what each of those things mean. So instead of saying excellence, which means something different to every single person, there's an example of that inside my company, which is that like, we don't see feedback as a threat, we see it as an opportunity. We actively seek it out from other people, and we give and receive it with grace. And that applies to every single person, me, everyone. I don't care if there's 1,000 employees or 4 employees, it doesn't matter. That is our relationship with feedback. So if, as a leader, you're going to actively seek out feedback from other people. So if I were to hire somebody who is incredibly defensive about feedback, et cetera, or they were a manager of somebody else and they retaliated against feedback, or I had a team that was afraid to give them feedback because they responded poorly, that is something I absolutely will address, because that cannot take place and have me say that my culture is actually a thing that people can experience. It is my culture that I have in my organization, and the culture you have inside your organization, is a promise to your employees. Mm-hmm. What does it feel like to be here? Who are we? How do we operate together? What are the ground rules of engagement for us? And if we allow people to violate that, we break that trust and we break that promise. We say, this isn't a culture, this is internal marketing, and it's political. So if you've been here long enough or you have a high enough title, you can act any way that you want. And that's not culture. It's not culture. That's what most organizations have had in place for a long time. It's not effective. To speak to that, it's like, for us to say we know who we are and we don't allow things to take place that are out of alignment with this very clearly defined culture for us, is actually really positive. I've had to make choices in my organization. I've removed people that are like, I don't just, oh, hey, you're not in alignment with this, you're fired immediately. I've had coaching conversations, giving them feedback, giving them an opportunity to improve and be clear about this behavior, this performance needs to look exactly like this, right? And done everything I can to give that person a chance to sort of come into that space. But ultimately, it's been because I've made the wrong hiring decisions or haven't been able to coach somebody to be able to get them into greatness and keep them. And that's on me as their leader. So it's a very juicy, big conversation. I wouldn't be worried about people making rumors like that. You guys knowing who you are and having a culture that's solid and strong and understanding. You don't have to tell the story of every single employee that comes and goes to save yourself, I think. But telling the narrative and being crystal clear from day one in the whole organization to be like, this culture matters. And we don't allow things to take place here that are out of alignment with this culture. Because it's important to us, we're committed to this. And I think that's valuable.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, because you were touching on it, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but it seems like some companies think having culture is having a purpose statement, making the claims, and that everyone in the organization is just going to understand what that purpose statement means to them, and then the culture is great at the company. It sounds like what you're saying is you need to identify what the feelings are that the person brings to the table in culture and what those values and actions embody as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like a really juicy conversation about defining culture and how do we make culture. When I said in the beginning of us chatting, how do you define culture in an organization? To me, it is How do people show up, treat other people, right, and approach their work together? It's what are the rules of engagement that define what it means to be part of a team? So if you want to create exceptional culture, that has to be, you have to have clearly defined behaviors and mindsets that are universally understood, that everybody takes ownership and accountability for, and that nobody is exempt from. Nobody. I mean it. That is the recipe. That is what the conditions that, if you want to have a culture that's exceptional, it has to be that. And so a lot of what organizations have done historically, and why a lot of organizations struggle with culture, is because they use broad, loose, high level concepts: trust, integrity, respect, teamwork, excellence, fun. Cool. If 50 people read the word respect, it means something different to every single one of those people. And if we're not defining our culture in what are the ground rules of engagement for us in behaviors, not values. Values are great, they're admirable. I get it. We want everyone to be respectful, but like, people who are disrespectful and gossip bad about other people, if you ask them, are you a respectful person? They will say yes. Every person has a different interpretation of what respect looks like. But if we, as an organization, if we say, okay, we're going to have a very clearly defined culture, and respect to us means that you don't gossip or badmouth about other people, right? If you have a problem with somebody else, you go right to the source. When we speak about other people here, it's to lift them up. If I say that is one ground rule for us in our culture, that's one example of what respect looks like. If 500 people read that sentence, every one of those people knows exactly what that means and how to do it. Look at every single person on my team and say, yes, they do, or no, they do not do this thing. Exactly with what I said with feedback. An example of excellence, if you like, we want excellence is one of our core values of our company and our culture. Cool. Tell me what that looks like. So to me, excellence in my culture is that we don't see feedback as a threat. We see it as an opportunity. We actively seek it out from other people, and we give and receive it with grace. If every person inside the entire organization does that behavior as I just described, then you have one element of your culture is excellent. But if I just say excellence, it's not going to impact people's behaviors on the ground. And historically, forever, the way companies have approached culture is that we lock the leadership team in a room for 3 days, and we come out of that room and say trust, integrity, respect, teamwork, excellence, fun. And the reality is that by the time that gets down to a front level employee who's been there for 2 months, it is meaningless to them. It will not impact their behavior. We have to clearly define, what does that look like here? What are the ground rules of engagement? What is our relationship with feedback? How do we deal with conflict? What is our relationship with change? How do we navigate change together? And what does accountability mean? Accountability sounds fun, but the reality is that if we don't say as an organization, one example of accountability is that we show up to meetings on time, prepared, right? And we honor internal deadlines. We take ownership of the things that are in our bucket of meeting those deadlines and like getting our work done. That we pay close attention to detail. We don't make tiny mistakes, and that we also allow that mistakes will happen, but we learn from those so that we don't repeat mistakes. To me, those are versions of integrity. Those are versions of accountability. But if we're not defining what those are in crystal clear behaviors, it's just loosey-goosey culture. And your question was really specifically about like mission statements, purpose statements. Right? And I don't mean this to insult any organization in the universe that has a purpose statement, but I guarantee a purpose statement for your organization is we want to create innovative projects. We want to change the world and make the world a better place. Okay. But I work with someone who is gossiping and dramatic and causing problems, or my leader, I'm afraid to give them feedback because they'll retaliate against me. What do I care about your objective as an organization to change the world and build innovative products? My direct work environment is that I work with toxic people. This person gossips. I'm afraid of my leader because they are like that.
Yes.
Culture is not broadly, what are you doing for the world? I do think it is important. People do need to find meaning and value in their work. So if I know that my organization has this impact and does a lot of like philanthropic things, and like that what we're doing, what I'm contributing to with my daily tasks is meaningful to me, yes, that matters. But that is not culture. What you want to do for the world and your vision statement in the world is not your culture. Culture is, how do people treat each other and how do they approach their work together? If I'm in a meeting and I'm afraid to share an idea because I think someone's going to think it's stupid and shoot me down, and that's going to hurt my prospects of advancement inside this company, if that is something somebody feels inside your organization, that is your culture. If you're not proud of that, fix it. Change it, name it, call it out. What are the behaviors of how we show up together? You want a culture that's actually tangible, that's measurable, that people can feel and experience every day. That's how you do it. I don't feel like, oh, mission statements are garbage. but I guarantee you they will not impact the way people show up together. We have to get crystal clear about what are the ground rules of engagement for us. That's culture. That's where it lives. That's where it breathes and dies. And if we are clear about that, if we're committed to that, and we're consistent with those three things, we have exceptional culture that people can feel every day. But that doesn't fall from the sky.
Galen 2024, you got to run for president now. That was great.
Baby. That's it. And I live and breathe this stuff. This is my work. I see it every day. I work organizations through this process. I see what doesn't work, what does work, what they have success with. And that's not like a theory. That's not me this is what I think culture looks like. I've got 15 to 20 organizations right now that are going through the process of defining their culture, rolling it out, like all this stuff in a very clear, like this is through years of trial and error. When I first started doing this work with companies, it didn't look like the way I do it now. It was a mess and they got stuck and caught in the weeds. And so me learning and growing, okay, this is where organizations are getting stuck. Executive teams can't drop everything they're doing to spend hundreds of hours on this work. How can I bite this into, how can I break this up? And this is through refining and defining that process and improving it. But like, I'm telling you, that's where culture lives.
So how do you connect your culture to your purpose? How do you find yourself saying, which one comes first? We've got a purpose statement. This is what we're trying to, some kind of a non-financial comment. And then we've got our culture. So do you see them tied together? One comes before the other?
They're not the same, but they fit in the same sort of like bucket as what are we doing here as an organization? The purpose statement for my organization is we help people to be better to each other. That's what we do. That's what my company does. That is the purpose of my company. And our culture is, if you are going to be hired here to be my marketing director or my videographer or my operations manager, this is what it takes to be part of this team. Our culture is separate from that. Our company has a purpose and a vision. This is why we exist, is to help other people be better to each other. But how you show up as part of this team is very crystally clear defined in what are the ground rules of engagement for us? How do we deal with feedback? Because those things are not defined by our vision as an organization. We can help people be better to each other and also be really dysfunctional and toxic and horrible inside, like internally, not for the rest of the world to think is our marketing piece. What does it mean to be part of this team? And we talk about accountability and holding people accountable. And to me, my question when people talk about that is holding them accountable to what? Your culture is what you hold them accountable to. And if your culture is loose, broadly, not well understood values like trust, integrity, respect, it's inconsistent. It's impossible. And if you have 10 different locations, I promise you have 10 different cultures. If that is because the way people experience culture in your organization is pretty much, unless you have a very clearly defined culture that's dialed in, the way that people experience culture is almost 100% dependent on what team they get hired onto. What leader are they working for, and who are the 4 or 5, 6 people that surround them every day? That is their experience of culture. And so inside organizations, we have many different cultures. This team, they get along, they're great, they're collaborative, they're awesome, like they retain employees within the same team forever. And then we have this other organization, part of the organization department over here that has high turnover. They don't work well together, like very, and to create something that is consistent, that is clear, that you're committed to, that's the beauty. So vision statement, mission statement, totally great. Where are we going? What direction are we rowing as a company? Are we all rowing together? And why are we here? What do we do? The things that we do for people need that. I think that's important. But what I care about is how do you show up and treat other people on this team? And how do we approach our work together? How do we do that work to satisfy that mission together? What does it feel like to be here? If you're not having conversations like that at that level, then you have a mishmash and it doesn't mean that you have a completely toxic culture because you don't have those things in place that I'm describing. You can have a very exceptional culture and not have it be clearly articulated, etc. But that's a liability, because if you do have that, I guarantee you it's based on the fact that you have a really strong leader or leaders that everybody loves. But guess what happens inside organizations? People retire. So if you replace half your executive team and the CEO is somebody else, what would happen to your culture? And in a lot of organizations, it would completely change. A different leadership style, a different personality type, a completely different culture, good, bad, or indifferent. So it's a liability to have a good culture that is just because we got lucky, right? And I'm not saying that's bad. It's real. If we create a culture that is based in very clearly defined behaviors and mindsets that are universally understood, that everybody takes ownership for, that we're consistent, that we integrate into every element of employee experience, hiring, onboarding, rewards and recognition, training, development, performance evaluations, then we could lose half of this company and replace them with brand new people, and all of those people would know what our culture is because it's clearly defined, it's integrated into our systems and processes, people's experience. Like that to me creates something that is consistent, scalable, right? It's measurable. I know I'm getting into the juice here, but like it's so important. We talk about culture, it's just a lot of talk unless we're at that level, right? Unless we're really talking about how do people show up together and integrating it and operationalizing it and understanding this is what we mean when we say culture. It's not just the feeling. It's tangible, it's tactical, it's strategic, it's measurable, it's tangible. That's the difference.
Galen, I got to tell you, I really enjoyed the podcast. I know we've had a great podcast. I made a lot of notes of things I'm going to go back in our organization and put in place and try. So that was really outstanding.
I hope you're going to come and spend some time and see me at the event.
So I want to ask you, how was the podcast for you, Galen? How was the experience for you?
This is great. I loved it. I love the rapid fire questions. That threw me for a loop. But yeah, this is really fun. It's really great. I love any and all topics around this stuff. There's so much to talk about. I think it's really juicy. And to me, it would be great if one person listened to this and learned something, gained something, was inspired to like level up in some way their culture, themselves as a leader, etc. That would be like, to me, total success.
We know you're a renowned speaker on this. We were so thrilled we could have you today on this podcast because this is what we're about. We really love having folks on like yourself that are energized out there, showing folks how to do things and how to get there. And for us, that's what it's all about. So thank you so much for all your time and work on this today. And we'll see you soon at one of the upcoming events at the national event at GATA.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. And thanks so much for having me. This has been a blast. So thank you both.
Good.
Galen's going to be the keynote speaker at the GATA annual convention in Maui in October. So that's going to be very exciting. He's going to be hosting an in-person workshop for all the young professionals that are attending GATA on Sunday, which will be a fantastic way to kick off the event. And then also, I have 2 questions for you to finish this. 1, any book recommendations that you have? And 2, who should be our next podcast guest if you have one?
Oh man, book recommendations. My favorite 2 books that I always recommend to every human being, leader or not. Number 1, Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. That book is brilliant for life. The other one is Crucial Conversations. And that book is written it has like multiple authors and I can never think of the authors. It has a red and white cover. It's called Crucial Conversations. I should Google it right now. But those 2 books, absolutely fantastic to level up your ability to navigate conversations with other people, give feedback. It's like there's so much about collaboration, emotional intelligence. Those books are fantastic. I think every person in the universe should read those.
Amazing. I will read them. Took a note. I cannot thank you enough for this. I learned so much personally and took a million notes. Thank you so much, Galen. And I hope you have a great flight and presentation and all of that. So Galen, if people want to get in contact with you, stay up to date on what you have going on, where should they go? What should they sign up for?
Yeah, great. So I have a mailing list that goes out every week. I put out a 5-minute video that is about culture, teams, all kinds of stuff, feedback, leadership, etc. It's called The Culture Drop. You can sign up on my website at GalenEmmanuele.com. It's 1 email per week, one Tuesday morning, 5-minute video, no spam. There's no paid version of that. It's free. And all that content is also on YouTube. Yeah, signing up for that it's a way to access a lot of free content. And if you don't want to sign up, you can just go to YouTube and find all the videos there too.
Excellent. And I do know that Gary Halter, who recommended you as a keynote speaker, gets that email every week and religiously watches the videos.
Galen, it was so great to have you on the podcast today. If anybody wants to check out more about GalenEmmanuele.com is a place to go. We're going to have a link on that on our website for you guys, and we'll send that information out to you and all the links to them. And I think you'll find that any of the good information you're looking for is also available on the YouTube. And so thank you again so much for being a participant today on the High Pressure Podcast and Tipping Point.
This was really fun.
Awesome.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks for coming out of hibernation with the podcast. So George, he was saying no to all the podcasts before this. So he said yes to us.
Yeah, I've been on a steady diet of no for podcasts, but I was like, this one sounds fun and coming up for the event. So I was like, yeah, let's rock it. All right. I'll see you.
All right. Bye guys.
Bye-bye.